She married the humble fisherman, and he took her to his empire in New York. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining us from. And subscribe if you love romantic stories like this. Now let's fall into this tale together. In the misty mornings of 1887, along the winding bayous of coastal Louisiana, where the salt air mingled with the earthy scent of cypress and magnolia, Rosalie Devereux dreamed of horizons beyond the weathered docks. She was 24 years old, with a slender figure wrapped in a faded grey cotton dress, puffed sleeves brushing her elbows as she worked mending fishing nets on the pier. Her chestnut hair, pulled into a simple bun adorned with a frayed ribbon, framed a face of intense green eyes, marked by years of quiet sacrifice. Her father, Jean-Baptiste Devereux, a widowed fisherman consumed by the harsh cough of sea lung, could barely sustain the family after the hurricane had shattered their small fleet of boats. Her younger brothers ran barefoot through the muddy shores, oblivious to the debts that loomed like lengthening shadows. Rosalie wasn't like the other girls in the port town. While they whispered about Sunday dances at the parish hall or suitors with rented carriages, she studied maritime charts borrowed from the harbour master, imagining trade routes across the Atlantic. She read novels when she could find them, dreaming of worlds beyond the bayou. But reality anchored her. Winter was approaching, and with it, the threat of losing their modest dockhouse. "We must marry whoever can save us," her father had told her one night, his voice hoarse as the fire crackled in the stone hearth. Rosalie had nodded, but in her heart, a rebellious fire burned. She wouldn't settle for just any savior. Then he arrived. James Sullivan appeared at the dock one autumn evening, a man of 32 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that spoke of years working foreign waters. He wore a worn wool jacket and canvas pants stained with salt and tar, his felt hat tilted over blue eyes that seemed to guard ancient secrets. He removed his hat when he saw her. His Irish accent was soft but unmistakable. "Miss Rosalie, I've heard your family needs help." The town buzzed with gossip within hours. A humble Irish fisherman, without lineage or apparent fortune, showing interest in the Devereux girl. The sharp tongues of the matrons called him an opportunist. The men at the tavern looked at him with suspicion, but Rosalie saw something different in him, a quietness that contrasted with the storm of her life. Over the following days, James worked alongside her father. He didn't just offer words, he repaired what remained of the boats. His hands knew knots she'd never seen, intricate sailor's knots from deep-sea vessels. He spoke casually of trade winds and currents as if he'd sailed the world. When a local ship needed emergency repairs, he drew technical diagrams that left the harbour master amazed. "Where did you learn such things?" Rosalie asked one evening, watching him tie a complex knot with practiced ease. "Years at sea teach a man many things." That enigmatic smile again, promising unspoken worlds. Their conversations on the dock under starlit skies revealed an educated man who quoted Melville and spoke of the shipping lanes connecting nations like veins of progress. "The world is changing, Rosalie," he told her one night as the wind rustled through the Spanish moss, "and we can change with it if you dare." But the choice wasn't simple. Her father, pressed by creditors who knocked at the door with demands for payment, grew more insistent each day. "It's an honest offer, daughter, better than poverty or the poorhouse." Rosalie hesitated to accept this stranger, whose past was veiled in mystery, to leave behind the dockhouse, her borrowed charts, and the echo of her dead mother in the empty rooms. Yet James was different. He didn't speak of money or payment. He spoke of partnership, of building something together. When he finally asked, truly asked, not demanded, his words were simple. "I won't pretend to offer you riches, but I can promise you honesty, partnership, and a chance at something more than this." He gestured to the weathered boats and debt-laden dock. "Will you trust me?" In the stillness of her small room that night, Rosalie looked at herself in the tarnished mirror, her cheeks flushed, remembering the accidental brush of James's hand when passing a water cup. It was a fragile beginning, but it was something. The next morning, with the sun painting the bayous gold, Rosalie stepped into the yard where James waited. The air smelled of ripe oranges and distant smoke. Her father and brothers watched from the doorway. "I accept," she said. Her voice was firm, despite the knot in her throat. James smiled, a subtle curve that promised worlds yet unsaid. "Then we'll be married today, if your father permits." "I've already spoken with Father Dubois at the parish." Her father stepped forward, his weathered hand clasping James's. "You'll treat her well." With my life, sir. That afternoon, in the small wooden church that had served the fishing community for 3 generations, Rosalie Devereux became Rosalie Sullivan. The ceremony was simple. She wore her mother's best Sunday dress, cleaned and pressed, with a spray of wild magnolias in her hair that her youngest brother had picked that morning. James stood beside her in his cleanest work clothes, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "With this ring I thee wed." Father Dubois, an elderly priest who'd known Rosalie since childhood, blessed them in French and English. "Ties to what God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Her father wept quietly in the front pew. Her brothers shifted uncomfortably in their Sunday best, not quite understanding why their sister was leaving. After the ceremony, the small community gathered for a brief celebration. Crawfish étouffée and rice, fiddle music, the warmth of neighbors who'd known hardship and celebrated small joys. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the bayou in shades of amber and gold, it was time. Rosalie stood in her small room one last time, packing her few possessions into a worn carpet bag. Her mother's brush and mirror, the navigation charts she'd borrowed and copied in secret, 2 books, her Sunday dress and work clothes. The room that had been hers for 24 years suddenly seemed smaller, emptier. Her father appeared in the doorway, his frame bent from years of hauling nets. "Your mother would be proud." His voice was thick. "You're not running from us. You're running toward something better. That takes courage. I'll send money as soon as we're settled, and I'll write every week." "I know you will." He pulled her into an embrace that smelled of salt water and tobacco. "Be happy, Rosalie. That's all I ask." Her brothers waited outside, awkward in their grief. The youngest, only 10 years old, threw his arms around her waist. "Don't forget us." "Never." She kissed the top of his head. "I could never forget you." James had loaded their belongings onto a small steamboat he'd hired. The captain, a grizzled man who asked no questions, busied himself with preparations. As Rosalie walked down the dock toward the boat, she turned back one last time. Her father stood with her brothers, silhouetted against the setting sun, hands raised in farewell. The small house where she'd grown up, the nets drying on their racks, the weathered boats, all of it receding into memory. James helped her aboard, his hand steady on her elbow. "Ready?" She took a deep breath, wiping her tears. "Ready?" The steamboat's engine coughed to life, paddle wheels churning the water. Rosalie stayed at the rail, watching until her father and brothers became specks, until the dock house disappeared behind the curve of the bayou. Only then did she turn to face forward, toward New Orleans, toward New York, toward the unknown future she'd chosen. James stood beside her. For the first time as husband and wife, they were truly alone with their choices. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. She thought of her mother's grave in the churchyard, of her brothers' faces, of her father's weathered hands. Then she thought of the life she'd been living, mending nets, facing debt, growing old in that small house with dreams that would never be realized. No regrets, only hope. The steamboat moved with a steady rhythm up the Mississippi, leaving behind the familiar bayous of Louisiana. Rosalie clung to the wooden rail, the spray from the paddle wheel misting her face. The midday sun beat down relentlessly, painting the landscape of dense forests and lazy tributaries in gold. James handled the vessel with experienced hands, his profile firm against the horizon. They had been traveling for 2 days since their departure, and the silence between them had thickened. Rosalie watched her new husband, wondering about the secrets he kept behind that facade of humility. "Where do you truly come from, James?" she had asked the first night, camped beside a sandbar where the water murmured its own secrets. He had stoked the fire with dry branches, his face illuminated by dancing flames. "From places that time has forgotten," a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But now our path is one." She wanted to press further, but something in his expression stopped her. On the evening of the 3rd day, the weather changed. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon like bruises, and the wind picked up, whipping the river into white-capped waves. The few other passengers on the small steamboat retreated below deck, but James remained at the wheel. "Get below, Rosalie." She stayed, gripping the rail, watching as the storm descended. Rain lashed the deck, and the boat pitched violently. Then she saw it. James wasn't just holding steady, he was reading the river, adjusting their course with the precision of a master captain, calling out orders to the pilot in technical language she barely understood. "Hard to starboard. Follow the deep channel, watch for the sandbar at 2 points off the bow." The pilot obeyed without question. eyes wide. "Sir, you've sailed before. No simple fisherman knows these waters like this." James said nothing, jaw tight with concentration as he guided them through the tempest. When the storm finally passed and they emerged into calmer waters, Rosalie approached him, soaked and shaking. "Who are you?" she whispered. He turned to her, rain streaming down his face. "I'm the man who chose you, Rosalie. That's all that matters for now." He paused. "But I promise, when we reach New York, you'll understand everything." "New York?" Her breath caught. "I thought we were going west. Trust me, please." Despite her confusion, despite the fear coiling in her chest, she nodded. They docked in New Orleans as the sun set, painting the French Quarter in shades of amber and rose. The city pulsed with life, vendors calling out, music drifting from saloons, ladies in silk walking with parasols despite the evening hour. James led her to a modest inn on the edge of the quarter, a building with wrought iron balconies dripping with bougainvillea. The innkeeper looked them over with narrowed eyes. "Good evening, sir and madam." Rosalie blushed under the scrutiny, adjusting her shawl. Her travel dress, though clean, paled next to the silks worn by other guests. James paid with silver coins and requested a simple room with dinner. As they ate at the oak table, surrounded by travelers, a merchant from New York in a brocade vest, a family of Irish immigrants whispering in Gaelic, Rosalie tasted venison stew, its rich flavor contrasting with the simple food of home. "This is different," she murmured. He nodded, cutting bread. "The world expands beyond fishing villages. Soon you'll see." That night, in their shared room with a single candle flickering on the nightstand, the weight of their new marriage settled between them. Rosalie unbuttoned her bodice with trembling hands. James turned toward the wall, respectful, as she slipped under the rough linen sheets. The silence filled with unasked questions. "Why me?" she whispered at last. He turned slowly, his silhouette outlined against the moonlight. "Because in your eyes I saw a strength the world hasn't yet bent, and because I need someone who will believe in me when the truth comes out." "What truth?" "Tomorrow. On the train to New York, I'll tell you everything. You deserve to know before we arrive." At dawn they boarded the train, Rosalie's first. The iron horse hurtled through countryside and cities, steam and coal smoke trailing behind. Once they were settled in their compartment, James closed the door and sat across from her. His hands were clasped tightly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked nervous. "My name is James Sullivan. That part is true." He paused. "But I'm not a simple fisherman." Rosalie stared at him, her mind reeling. 10 years ago, I was the heir to Sullivan and Company, one of the largest shipping companies on the Atlantic coast." Silence. She couldn't speak. "My father built it from nothing, but his business partner, Thomas Worthington, grew greedy. When my father refused to expand into questionable cargo, Thomas began scheming." He paused, jaw tightening. "In 1877, a ship called the Atlantic Star went down in a storm. 23 men died. Thomas blamed the weather, but I was the first mate on that voyage." His voice dropped. "I saw what really happened. Thomas had loaded the ship with contraband, opium hidden in tea crates. When I discovered it and threatened to report him, he sabotaged the ship during the storm, opened the bilge valves to sink the evidence." Rosalie's hand flew to her mouth. "I survived. So did Thomas. But when we got back to port, he'd already spun his story. That I was the one who'd loaded illegal cargo, that I'd panicked during the storm and abandoned ship." James looked directly at her. "My father was dying, too ill to fight for me. Thomas had forged documents, bribed officials. I faced arrest for murder and smuggling." "So you ran?" "I ran. I disappeared into the bayous and fishing villages, learning to survive with nothing but my hands and my knowledge of the sea." He leaned forward. "I thought I'd never go back, but then my father died last year. I inherited the company, or what's left of it. Thomas has been slowly draining it dry, claiming he's managing it in trust for the missing heir." He looked at her directly. "I came back to Louisiana to find myself again, to remember what it meant to work with honest people for honest wages, and I found you." He reached across and took her hand. "When I return to New York, Thomas will try to destroy me again. He'll claim my marriage is fraudulent, that I'm not fit to inherit. He'll drag your name through the mud." James squeezed her hand gently. "I'm giving you a choice right here, right now. We can get off at the next stop. I'll give you enough to go back to Louisiana, to pay off your father's debts. You can tell everyone I died or disappeared. No one will blame you." Rosalie's mind spun. "Or you can stay with me. Help me expose Thomas and reclaim what he stole. It won't be easy. Society will mock you. Thomas will attack you. But I promise, I'll stand beside you through all of it." The train rattled on. Rosalie looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers the same, hands that knew work and hardship. "I didn't leave Louisiana for safety," she said finally. "I left because I wanted more than survival. I wanted purpose." She met his eyes. "Fighting Thomas gives purpose to all those men who died, to your father's legacy, to honest sailors who deserve better. Then I'll fight beside you." James exhaled, relief flooding his features. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she squeezed his hand. "But James, no more secrets. From now on, we face everything together. Together, I promise." The sun sank into the horizon like a melted gold coin, painting the sky above the Hudson in deep oranges and purples. Their carriage rattled down the cobblestone road descending toward New York, where the air already carried the salt of the Atlantic, mixed with the acrid smoke of factories. Rosalie straightened in her seat. Now that she knew the truth, the city seemed both more exciting and more threatening. This wasn't just a new home, it was a battlefield. James kept his gaze on the road, jaw tense. "Thomas doesn't know I'm back yet. I sent no word ahead. But Margaret, my father's sister, has been living in the mansion. She's been Thomas's ally, helping him manage the estate. When we arrive, she'll be surprised." "Will she be hostile?" "Undoubtedly," James said. "Margaret always valued wealth and status above family. She saw my father's company as her security. My return threatens that." At nightfall they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, a marvel of iron and wood that vibrated under the weight of carriages and hurried pedestrians. Below, the East River teemed with life, sailboats unloading tea from China, immigrants disembarking with worn trunks, and gas lamps flickering on the shores like watchful eyes. Rosalie leaned out, the wind whipping her shawl. This wasn't the wild prairie she'd once imagined. It was a world of towers and shadows, where the rich devoured the weak. James guided the carriage through narrow streets of Lower Manhattan, passing noisy taverns where sailors sang Irish ballads and salon ladies laughed with French accents. Finally, they stopped before a wrought iron gate on Battery Park, flanked by tall oaks and crystal lanterns. Rosalie blinked, taking in the mansion rising behind the gate, a palace of limestone with Doric columns and arched windows that gleamed under gaslight. Ship weather vanes crowned the towers, and through the windows she could see crystal chandeliers. "This is your home," she breathed. "Our home," James corrected. "If we can keep it." He helped her down from the carriage. A butler, a tall man in black livery and white tie, emerged from the main door. His eyes widened in shock. "Master James, is it truly—" "We thought you were dead, sir." "Not dead, Fletcher. Just absent. Is my aunt at home?" "Yes, sir. She's in the drawing room with Mr. Worthington, sir. They've been going over company accounts." James's expression hardened. "Perfect timing, then. Fletcher, this is my wife, Mrs. Rosalie Sullivan. Please have the staff prepare the master suite." "Your wife, sir." Fletcher's shock deepened, but years of service kept him composed. "Of course, sir. Welcome home, madam." Inside, the foyer was a dream of Italian marble and tapestries embroidered with scenes of European hunting. A curved staircase ascended toward salons illuminated by crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled of beeswax and fresh roses from a porcelain vase. But Rosalie had no time to admire it. Voices echoed from the drawing room, a woman's sharp tones and a man's deeper rumble. James strode forward, Rosalie beside him. He pushed open the double doors without knocking. The drawing room was opulent, green velvet furniture, a marble fireplace, walls lined with paintings of ships. Two people stood by the fireplace. A woman of about 40 in a navy blue silk dress with a pearl necklace, her black hair in a severe bun, and a man of perhaps 35, tall and thin with a waxed moustache and cold eyes. Both turned, and their expression shifted from annoyance at the interruption to utter shock. "James," the woman gasped. "It can't be." "Hello, Aunt Margaret," James said coolly. Thomas. Thomas Worthington recovered first, his face shifting from shock to calculation. "James Sullivan, we thought you drowned, or hanged yourself out of guilt. How unfortunate that neither was true." "Unfortunate for you, perhaps," James replied. "I've come home to reclaim my inheritance." Margaret found her voice. "Your inheritance? You abandoned everything. You were accused of smuggling and murder." "Thomas has been protecting the family name. keeping the company afloat. By embezzling funds and forging documents. James cut her off. I know what he's been doing, Margaret, and I'm going to prove it. Thomas laughed, a cold sound. Prove it? With what? Your word against mine? You're a fugitive, James. A disgrace. The moment the authorities know you're back, you'll be arrested. Then I suppose you'll be calling them, James said evenly. Oh, I will. Thomas moved toward the door, but paused. But first, I'm curious. Who's this? His gaze slid to Rosalie like oil over water. Your companion. My wife, James said firmly, drawing Rosalie forward. Rosalie Devereux Sullivan. We were married in Louisiana a few days ago. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Married? To whom? Some backwater nobody? James, what have you done? I've chosen a partner who values honesty over gold, James replied. Which is more than I can say for present company. Thomas's smile was predatory. How romantic. A runaway heir and a swamp bride. The papers will love this story. He moved to the door. Enjoy your reunion. It will be brief. By tomorrow, the courts will be freezing all Sullivan assets pending investigation of your return. And your new wife, he spat the word, will discover that marrying into scandal is far less pleasant than she imagined. He left, his footsteps echoing on the marble. Margaret remained, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. You fool, she hissed at James. You've destroyed us all. Thomas will take everything, the company, this house, the ships. And for what? Some fisherman's daughter who caught your eye. Leave us, Margaret, James said quietly. This is still my home, for now, Margaret said coldly. But not for long. She swept out, her skirts rustling with indignation. Alone. When they were alone, Rosalie released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That was exactly as I expected, James finished grimly. He ran a hand through his hair. Thomas will move fast. By tomorrow morning, the scandal will be in every paper. By afternoon, legal proceedings will begin. Then we need to move faster, Rosalie said. You said you could prove what he did. How? James walked to a bookshelf and pressed a hidden catch. A panel swung open, revealing a small safe. My father installed this when he first grew suspicious of Thomas. He kept copies of everything here, the real ledgers, correspondence, documentation. If Thomas has been embezzling, the proof is in the discrepancies between these records and whatever he's been showing the banks. He pulled out stacks of leather-bound ledgers. But it won't be enough just to prove theft. I need to prove what happened on the Atlantic Star. That's the crime that made me run, and it's the weapon Thomas will use to discredit me. How can you prove it after 10 years? Rosalie asked. I can't, James admitted. The ship sank. The evidence went down with it. Thomas destroyed or falsified everything else, unless what? Unless we find someone else who knows the truth, someone Thomas couldn't silence. James's eyes lit with sudden hope. The captain kept a log. It was his habit. Meticulous records of everything. If that log survived, if it washed ashore or was recovered, where would it be? Rosalie asked. The Maritime Commission keeps all recovered artifacts from wrecks. It's a long shot, but then that's where we start, Rosalie said firmly. Tomorrow, first thing. James looked at her with something like wonder. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm also angry. Thomas killed 23 men and blamed you for it. Margaret cares more about money than family. They deserve to face justice, and your father deserves to have his name cleared. James pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. You chose me, she said softly. Now I choose to fight for us. They stood there in the lamplight, surrounded by the trappings of wealth, knowing that by morning the battle would truly begin. Rosalie woke in a bedroom that seemed pulled from a dream. Blue damask curtains, a four-poster bed of carved mahogany, a marble vanity with an oval mirror. But the dream became a nightmare when Fletcher brought the morning papers with breakfast. I thought you should see these before going out, sir, the butler said quietly. James unfolded the New York Herald. The headline screamed, Sullivan heir returns with mysterious bride, fugitive or fortune hunter. Below it, a salacious article described James's dramatic reappearance after a decade of hiding from justice and speculated about Rosalie's origins. Little is known about the new Mrs. Sullivan, except that she hails from a Louisiana fishing village and brings no fortune or connections to the Union. The Times was more vicious. Scandal in shipping. Dead man's return raises questions. With an editorial suggesting James had faked his death to escape prosecution, and was now returning with a convenient marriage to claim an inheritance he didn't deserve. And in the society pages, cruel cartoons depicted Rosalie as a barefoot swamp creature, clutching money bags while James, drawn as a coward, hid behind her skirts. Rosalie set down the paper, her hands shaking. "They don't even know me, and they've already decided who I am." "That's what Thomas does," James said grimly. "He shapes the narrative before the truth can catch up. By tonight, every drawing room in New York will be gossiping about us." "Then we don't give them time to set the story in stone," Rosalie said, forcing steel into her voice. "The Maritime Commission. Can we go today? It opens at 9. James checked his pocket watch. "We have an hour." The New York Maritime Commission occupied a weathered building near the South Street seaport, smelling of salt, tar, and old paper. The clerk, a wizened man with ink-stained fingers and thick spectacles, looked up as they entered. "Help you?" he asked, barely glancing at them. "We're looking for records from a shipwreck," James said. "The Atlantic Star, lost in March of 1877. The clerk's eyes sharpened. "That was Worthington's ship, wasn't it? Big scandal. Smuggling charges, if I recall. Thought the first mate went down with her." "I'm the first mate," James said quietly. "I survived, and I'm trying to find out what really happened." The clerk studied him for a long moment, then shuffled to a back room. They heard drawers opening, papers rustling. After what seemed an eternity, he returned with a wooden box marked Atlantic Star, recovered items. "Not much survived," he said, setting it on the counter. "A few pieces of wreckage, some personal effects that washed ashore. And this!" He lifted out a leather-bound book, water-stained and warped but intact. The cover read, "Captain's Log, Atlantic Star." Rosalie's breath caught. It survived. "Sealed oilskin," the clerk said. "Captain Morrison was old school, kept his log protected in case of disaster. Washed up on Long Island 3 months after the wreck. Been sitting here ever since. No one's asked for it in years." James reached for it with trembling hands. "May I?" "You family. I served under Captain Morrison. These are his last words. I need to know what he wrote." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "Read it here. Can't let it leave the building." James opened the log carefully. The pages were brittle, the ink faded but legible. He turned to the final entries. March 15th, 1877. "Today I discovered unauthorized cargo in hold number 3. Confronted Mr. Worthington, who became belligerent. He informed me the cargo is private investment, not subject to company manifest. Upon inspection, the crates marked T contain something else. The smell and packaging suggest opium. I have demanded he report this to authorities when we dock. He refused and threatened my command. March 16th, 1877. First Mate Sullivan has independently discovered the contraband. He came to me with concerns, and I confirmed his suspicions. Together we documented the cargo and planned to report it upon arrival in New York. Mr. Worthington has been watching us closely. I fear he suspects our intentions. March 17th, 1877. Weather turning. Storm approaching from the south. I recommend we make for safe harbor and wait it out. Mr. Worthington insists we maintain course and speed, claiming the cargo is time-sensitive. His desperation confirms my suspicions about its illegal nature. Young Sullivan argues for caution, but Worthington overrules us both, citing his authority as part owner. March 18th, 1877. Storm upon us. Seas running 30 feet. I ordered all hands to storm stations. At 2100 hours, I discovered water in the lower holds, far more than storm leakage would account for. Upon investigation with First Mate Sullivan, we found the bilge pumps had been sabotaged. Someone opened the seacocks deliberately. Sullivan confronted Worthington on the quarterdeck. I witnessed Worthington strike him and order him confined. I intervened, and Worthington threatened us both. He intends to sink this ship to destroy the evidence of his smuggling. He will blame the storm and poor seamanship. March 19th, 1877, 0200 hours. Ship is going down. Worthington has disappeared into a lifeboat with the ship's strongbox. Sullivan has organized the crew to launch remaining boats, but the storm and list of the ship make it nearly impossible. I am staying with my ship, as is tradition, but I leave this log in its oilskin pouch, tied to a cork float, in hopes it will survive even if we do not. To whoever finds this, Thomas Worthington murdered this ship and her crew. James Sullivan is innocent. He tried to save us all. If there is justice in this world, let the truth be known. Captain Edward Morrison. The final entry ended there. James's hands shook as he finished reading. Tears streaked his face. He knew, James whispered. He knew what was happening, and he documented it all. Rosalie squeezed his shoulder. This is the proof you need. The clerk had been reading over James's shoulder, his face grave. I remember when this came in. Everyone assumed it was just routine logs. Nobody actually read it carefully. Can we get a certified copy? Rosalie asked. Something that will hold up in court. I can do better than that, the clerk said. I can testify that this log has been in our possession since 1877, untouched and unaltered. That'll make it admissible evidence. He looked at James. That man, Worthington, he's been strutting around the harbour for years, playing the respectable businessman. If he murdered a ship, he should hang for it. He will, James said, his voice hardening, so I'll make sure of it. But exposing Thomas wouldn't be simple. When they returned to the mansion, Margaret had made her own move. The drawing room was filled with society women, the same ones who'd been gossiping about Rosalie in the papers. Fletcher met them at the door, apologetic. I'm sorry, sir. Your aunt insisted. She said it was time to introduce Mrs. Sullivan to proper society. It was a trap, and they both knew it, but retreating would look like cowardice. We'll go in, Rosalie said, lifting her chin. I won't hide. The room fell silent as they entered. 12 women in expensive gowns sat with teacups, their eyes fixing on Rosalie like predators scenting prey. Margaret rose, her smile sharp. James, Rosalie, how good of you to join us. Ladies, may I present my nephew and his wife, Mrs. Rosalie Sullivan from Louisiana. The way she said Louisiana made it sound like a disease. A woman in grey taffeta, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, according to her introduction, smiled coldly. How charming. We were just discussing the importance of proper breeding in marriage. Family connections, you know, they're the foundation of society. Another woman, younger and blonde, tittered behind her fan. I'm sure the bayous have their own charms. Tell us, Mrs. Sullivan, did you attend finishing school, or is education less valued in your circles? Rosalie felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her voice steady. My father taught me navigation and maritime charts. My mother taught me to read French and English before she died. I may not have attended finishing school, but I can calculate currents, plot courses, and read the weather. Skills that kept my family alive. How? Practical, Eleanor said, her tone making it an insult. Ladies, James interjected, his voice cold. My wife has more genuine skill in her hands than most of you have in your entire finishing school education. She can actually navigate a ship, not just pretend to be decorative on one. Shocked gasps filled the room. Margaret's eyes glittered with triumph. This was exactly the scene she'd wanted. Proof that James and his bride didn't belong in polite society. But then Rosalie spoke, her voice clear and calm. I understand my presence here is unusual. I'm not from your world, and I don't pretend to be. But I also didn't marry James for his money. I married him when I thought he was a poor fisherman. I came to love the man, not the mansion. If that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, I'll survive the disappointment. She turned to Margaret. But I won't apologize for who I am. And I won't stand by while your partner Thomas Worthington destroys what James's father built with lies and murder. The room went deadly silent. Murder, Eleanor breathed. What are you talking about? The Atlantic Star, Rosalie said clearly. 23 men died when that ship went down. Thomas Worthington sabotaged it to hide his smuggling operation and blamed James. We have proof, the captain's log, recovered from the wreck. It names Thomas as the murderer. Margaret stood abruptly. That's slander, you'll be sued. It's truth, James said, pulling the certified copy from his jacket. Captain Morrison's own words, documented before he died with his ship. Thomas killed those men, and he's been living free while I've been branded a criminal. That ends now. He set the document on the table. Ladies, you can continue to gossip about my wife's origins. Or you can ask yourselves why you've been taking tea with the aunt of a murderer and the business partner of a smuggler. Your choice. He offered his arm to Rosalie. Come, we have work to do. They walked out together, leaving a room of stunned, whispering women behind them. But exposing Thomas wouldn't be simple. When they returned to the mansion, Margaret had made her own move. The drawing room was filled with society women, the same ones who'd been gossiping about Rosalie in the papers. Fletcher met them at the door, apologetic. I'm sorry, sir, your aunt insisted. She said it was time to introduce Mrs. Sullivan to proper society. It was a trap and they both knew it, but retreating would look like cowardice. "We'll go in," Rosalie said, lifting her chin. "I won't hide." The room fell silent as they entered. 12 women in expensive gowns sat with teacups, their eyes fixing on Rosalie like predators scenting prey. Margaret rose, her smile sharp. "James, Rosalie, how good of you to join us. Ladies, may I present my nephew and his wife, Mrs. Rosalie Sullivan from Louisiana." The way she said Louisiana made it sound like a disease. A woman in grey taffeta, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, according to her introduction, smiled coldly. How charming. "We were just discussing the importance of proper breeding in marriage. Family connections, you know. They're the foundation of society." Another woman, younger and blonde, tittered behind her fan. "I'm sure the bayous have their own charms. Tell us, Mrs. Sullivan, did you attend finishing school? Or is education less valued in your circles?" Rosalie felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her voice steady. "My father taught me navigation and maritime charts. My mother taught me to read French and English before she died. I may not have attended finishing school, but I can calculate currents, plot courses, and read the weather. Skills that kept my family alive." "How practical," Eleanor said, her tone making it an insult. "Ladies," James interjected, his voice cold, "my wife has more genuine skill in her hands than most of you have in your entire finishing school education. She can actually navigate a ship, not just pretend to be decorative on one." Shocked gasps filled the room. Margaret's eyes glittered with triumph. This was exactly the scene she'd wanted, proof that James and his bride didn't belong in polite society. But then Rosalie spoke, her voice clear and calm. "I understand my presence here is unusual. I'm not from your world, and I don't pretend to be. But I also didn't marry James for his money. I married him when I thought he was a poor fisherman. I came to love the man, not the mansion. If that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, I'll survive the disappointment." She turned to Margaret. "But I won't apologize for who I am, and I won't stand by while your partner Thomas Worthington destroys what James's father built with lies and murder." The room went deadly silent. "Murder?" Eleanor breathed. "What are you talking about?" "The Atlantic Star," Rosalie said clearly. 23 men died when that ship went down. Thomas Worthington sabotaged it to hide his smuggling operation and blamed James. We have proof, the captain's log, recovered from the wreck. It names Thomas as the murderer." Margaret stood abruptly. "That's slander. You'll be sued." "It's truth," James said, pulling the certified copy from his jacket. Captain Morrison's own words, documented before he died with his ship. Thomas killed those men, and he's been living free while I've been branded a criminal. That ends now." He set the document on the table. "Ladies, you can continue to gossip about my wife's origins, or you can ask yourselves why you've been taking tea with the aunt of a murderer and the business partner of a smuggler. Your choice." He offered his arm to Rosalie. "Come, we have work to do." They walked out together, leaving a room of stunned, whispering women behind them. That evening, Thomas made his move. A messenger arrived with a legal summons. James was being sued for defamation, and an injunction had been filed to freeze all Sullivan & Co. assets pending an investigation into his fraudulent return. But attached to the legal documents was a personal note. "James, you think an old captain's log will save you. I have lawyers, judges, and half of New York's police on my payroll. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd stayed in the bayous. Your father trusted me, and look where it got him. Your new bride is in over her head. Save her the humiliation and leave now, while you still can. Tomorrow night, there's a maritime auction at Pier 17. I'm selling off Sullivan & Co. as assets to settle company debts. Your ships will be gone by midnight. Unless you want to watch your father's legacy disappear, I suggest you do something stupid like showing up to contest it. I'll be waiting. W. James crumpled the letter. He's forcing a public confrontation. Then we give him one, Rosalie said. We have the log. We have the truth. Tomorrow night, we end this. If we fail, we won't, Rosalie said firmly. Your father believed in justice. Captain Morrison died for it. 23 men deserve their story told. We're not backing down. James looked at her, this woman who'd left everything to stand beside him, and felt something shift in his chest. How did I get so lucky? You chose an honest life over an easy one, she said. That's not luck. That's character. They spent the night preparing, going over every detail of the case, every piece of evidence. By dawn, they were ready. The final battle was coming. The gas lamps of Pier 17 flickered like captive stars, illuminating the crowd gathered for the auction. It was a mild October evening in 1887, and it seemed all of New York's shipping elite had turned out for what Thomas had billed as the liquidation of Sullivan & Co. assets to settle outstanding debts. The pier had been transformed into an auction house. Ships of the Sullivan fleet were moored alongside. Beautiful vessels with their names painted in gold. Margaret Rose, Hudson's Pride, Atlantic Dream. Each represented years of James's father's work, and now they sat like prisoners awaiting execution. Rosalie descended from their carriage, her hand clutching James's arm, her heart pounding like a war drum. She wore a gown of ivory silk with a modest neckline, adorned with Valenciennes lace, puffed sleeves cascading to her elbows, and a skirt with a crinoline that whispered against the wooden planks. A cashmere shawl covered her shoulders, and a silver locket, one James had given her that morning containing a miniature of his father, gleamed against her chest. James, in a black frock coat with satin lapels and an impeccable white tie, exuded a calm that concealed the inner storm. The pier buzzed with life. Ladies in diamond tiaras and gloves to their shoulders chatted in clusters. Gentlemen with gold watches in their vests exchanged anecdotes of Wall Street. Journalists with notebooks hovered like vultures, sensing scandal. Margaret stood near the auction platform, her scarlet velvet dress cinched by a whalebone corset, her high bun crowned with ostrich plumes. When she saw them, her expression shifted from satisfaction to alarm. "You shouldn't have come," she hissed as they passed. "You're only making this worse." "For whom?" James replied coolly. Thomas Worthington stood on the raised platform at the pier's center, impeccable in his evening clothes, mustache waxed to perfection, eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. The auctioneer, a portly man with a gavel, called for order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather tonight for the liquidation auction of Sullivan & Co. assets. Due to outstanding debts in the amount of $500,000 held by Mr. Thomas Worthington, the following vessels are to be sold." He began listing the ships. With each name, Rosalie felt James tense beside her. This was his father's legacy, about to be scattered to the winds. The first ship, Hudson's Pride, a beautiful three-masted schooner, went for half its actual value to one of Thomas's associates. The crowd murmured, sensing something wasn't quite right, but no one objected. As the auctioneer prepared to sell the second ship, James stepped forward. "I object to these proceedings," he announced, his voice carrying across the pier. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Thomas smiled, predatory. "James Sullivan, how good of you to attend your own funeral, but you have no standing to object. You abandoned this company 10 years ago." "I didn't abandon it," James said clearly. "I fled false charges you manufactured to cover your own crimes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Notebooks appeared. "Careful, James," Thomas said, still smiling. "Slander is a serious charge, especially when you're already facing accusations of smuggling and manslaughter from the Atlantic Star disaster." "I'm facing accusations you created," James shot back. "But I'm not here to defend myself with words. I have something better." He pulled out the certified copy of the captain's log. "This is Captain Edward Morrison's log from the Atlantic Star, recovered from the wreck and held in the Maritime Commission's archives for 10 years. It details exactly what happened the night the ship went down." The crowd pressed closer, intrigued. Thomas's smile faltered. James read aloud, his voice steady. "March 19th, 1877. Thomas Worthington murdered this ship and her crew. James Sullivan is innocent. He tried to save us all." The pier erupted in shocked murmurs. "The captain documented everything," James continued. "The contraband cargo, Thomas's threats, the sabotage of the bilge pumps, his own escape in a lifeboat with the company strongbox while 23 men drowned." Thomas's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. "That's absurd. A faker, clearly created to exonerate yourself." "The clerk from the Maritime Commission is here to testify to its authenticity," James said. "It's been in their possession, sealed and unchanged, since 1877. This is Captain Morrison's handwriting. His words, his final testimony." Thomas looked around wildly, seeking support. Even if that log is real, it proves nothing. The captain was confused, panicking in a storm. He didn't know what he saw. "He knew exactly what he saw," Rosalie said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to her, and so did the crew. She held up a second document. This is a sworn affidavit from Patrick O'Brien, who served as boatswain on the Atlantic Star. He survived the wreck but was too frightened to come forward. Until now. She read, I witnessed Thomas Worthington strike First Mate Sullivan when Sullivan attempted to stop the sabotage. I saw Worthington abandon ship while men were still trapped below decks. I stayed silent because Mr. Worthington threatened my family, but I can no longer live with this cowardice. James Sullivan saved my life that night. Thomas Worthington is a murderer. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, angrier. Where is this O'Brien? Thomas demanded. Don't let him show himself if he exists, sir. I'm here. A man stepped out of the crowd, weathered in his late 40s, dressed in a simple but clean suit. Patrick O'Brien, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. I'm here, he repeated, climbing onto the platform. And I'll testify in any court in this land. Thomas Worthington killed 23 good men. He blamed James Sullivan to cover his crimes. And he's been bleeding the Sullivan Company dry ever since, using it to fund his criminal enterprises. Furthermore, James said, pulling out more documents, I have the real company ledgers. My father kept duplicate records that show every instance of embezzlement over the past 10 years. Thomas has stolen over $200,000 from Sullivan & Co., funneling it into private accounts. He spread the ledgers on a table near the platform. These are the authentic records. Compare them to whatever Thomas has been showing the banks, and you'll find massive discrepancies. The debts he claims the company owes, they're fictional. He created them to justify this auction so he could buy the ships himself through proxies at a fraction of their value. A banker in the crowd pushed forward, examining the ledgers. His face darkened. These numbers, if these are accurate, Mr. Worthington, you've committed massive fraud. They're lies, Thomas shouted. Forgeries created by a desperate man. They match the bank deposits, the banker said coldly. I can verify these entries against our own records. Mr. Worthington, I believe you've been using our bank to launder stolen money. The tide was turning. Rosalie could feel it in the air, the crowd's curiosity shifting to anger, their tolerance for scandal giving way to demands for justice. A ship captain in the crowd called out, I lost 2 crew members on the Atlantic Star. If Worthington killed them for smuggling profits, he should hang. Others joined in. My cousin died on that ship. We've been doing business with a murderer. The authorities should be called. Thomas looked around desperately. Margaret had disappeared into the crowd, abandoning him. This is a conspiracy, Thomas shouted. Sullivan has bought false testimony and forged documents to steal what I've built. What you've stolen, you mean? James said coldly. My father trusted you. He made you partner because he believed in your skill and integrity, and you repaid him by smuggling contraband, murdering innocent sailors, framing me and robbing his company blind. He turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not asking you to take my word. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. The captain's log, the witness testimony, the financial records. The truth is here, documented and verified. The only question is, will we let a murderer and thief walk free, or will we demand justice? As if on cue, uniformed police officers appeared at the pier's entrance. The maritime clerk had indeed notified the authorities, and they'd been waiting for this moment. Mr. Thomas Worthington, the lead officer called, you're under arrest for murder, smuggling, embezzlement, and fraud. Thomas tried to run, but the crowd blocked him. The officers seized him, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. This isn't over, he shouted as they dragged him away. I have lawyers. I have connections. You haven't seen the last of me. But his voice faded as they removed him from the pier, and the crowd broke into a mixture of shocked conversations and scattered applause. The auctioneer looked bewildered. The creditor has been arrested. The debts appear to be fraudulent. I declare this auction null and void. As the crowd dispersed, several businessmen approached James. Ship owners, merchants, even some who'd been skeptical. Mr. Sullivan, one said, extending his hand. I served under your father years ago. He was an honest man. I'm glad to see his son is the same. If you need help rebuilding the company, you have my support. Others echoed the sentiment. By the time the pier emptied, James had commitments for cargo contracts, letters of credit from banks, and offers of partnership from legitimate businesses. Rosalie stood beside him through all of it, shaking hands, thanking people, representing the Sullivan name with grace despite her exhaustion. When they were finally alone, standing at the pier's edge with the Sullivan ships rocking gently at their moorings, James pulled her close. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." "We did it together," she corrected. "As it should be." Patrick O'Brien approached, looking both relieved and anxious. "Mr. Sullivan, sir, I want to apologize for staying silent so long. I was a coward." "You came forward when it mattered," James said, extending his hand. "That takes more courage than most men have. Thank you." "What will happen to the company now?" Patrick asked. James looked at the ships, then at Rosalie. "We'll rebuild it. Do it right this time. Fair wages, safe conditions, honest business. It's what my father would have wanted." He turned to Patrick. "We'll need good men." "How are you looking for work?" The man's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored, sir." As Patrick walked away, James and Rosalie stood in the lamplight, the city humming around them. "What now?" Rosalie asked. "Now we go home," James said. "Our real home. And we build the life we were meant to have." He kissed her then, not the chaste kiss of their wedding, but a real kiss, full of promise and passion and the relief of survival. Around them, the ships rocked gently at their moorings, waiting for their new beginning. Over the following weeks, Thomas Worthington's trial became the talk of New York. The evidence was overwhelming. The captain's log, Patrick O'Brien's testimony, the financial records, and even testimony from dock workers who'd been bribed to falsify shipping manifests. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators. Rosalie attended every session, sitting beside James in a show of solidarity. The society women who'd mocked her at Margaret's tea party now nodded respectfully when she passed. Thomas's lawyers tried every tactic, claiming the log was forged, attacking Patrick O'Brien's credibility, suggesting James had manufactured the financial discrepancies, but the evidence was too solid, the witnesses too credible. On the final day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. We find the defendant, Thomas Worthington, guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, smuggling, embezzlement, and fraud. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison with hard labor. As the bailiffs led him away, Thomas locked eyes with James one final time. The hatred there was pure but impotent. Justice had been served. Margaret avoided criminal charges. There was no proof she'd known about the murder, only the embezzlement. But her social standing collapsed overnight. The same society that had once courted her favor now shunned her. She left New York quietly, moving to a small house in New Jersey. James offered her a modest pension, more than she deserved, but he refused to let his father's sister live in poverty. "Your father would want you to be better than she was," Rosalie told him. "This is how you do that." Margaret never thanked him. But years later, a letter arrived, stiff, formal, but containing something like remorse. "James, I won't ask forgiveness for what I cannot undo, but I acknowledge that I chose poorly. Your father deserved better. You deserve better. Your wife shows more grace than I ever did. May you build something worthy of the Sullivan name. M." It wasn't much, but it was something. With Thomas's fraud exposed and the company assets recovered, James set about rebuilding. But he didn't simply restore it to what it had been, he transformed it into something better. Patrick O'Brien became the head of maritime safety, implementing new protocols that put sailor welfare first. Ships were equipped with improved lifeboats, better navigation equipment and medical supplies. Crews received fair wages, injury insurance, and pensions for their families. "You're spending too much on the men," one investor complained. "You'll never turn a profit." "Then I'll find different investors," James replied calmly. "My father's company was built on the backs of honest sailors. I won't profit from their exploitation." Surprisingly, the approach worked. Sullivan & Co. gained a reputation as the best company to sail for. They had the lowest desertion rate, the most loyal crews, and the best safety record in the Atlantic trade. Clients willing to pay premium prices for reliable, honest service sought them out. Within 2 years, the company was more profitable than it had ever been under Thomas's management. But Rosalie wanted to do more than just run a shipping company. One evening, as they reviewed ledgers in the study, she looked up. "What about the children?" she asked. "What children?" James replied, distracted by a column of numbers. "The ones like your crew members, sons and daughters. The ones growing up on the docks with no education, no opportunities. What happens to them?" James set down his pen, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "A school," Rosalie said, her eyes lighting up. "A maritime academy. We could teach navigation, engineering, maritime law, give them real skills that lead to real careers. Not just for boys, either. Girls can learn these things too." James smiled. You're thinking of yourself. I'm thinking of all the girls like me who love the sea but are told it's not for them. She leaned forward. James, we have the resources. We have the connections. We could change lives. He reached across the desk and took her hand. Then let's do it. The old Sullivan & Co. warehouse on South Street became the Devereux Sullivan Maritime Academy. Rosalie insisted on including her family name. You're not just Mrs. Sullivan. You're Rosalie Devereux, and that name deserves to be honored, James had said. They hired the best instructors they could find, retired ship captains, engineers, navigators. Patrick O'Brien taught maritime safety, James taught ship management and business ethics, and Rosalie taught navigation and cartography. The first class had 20 students, boys and girls from dock worker families, orphans from the waterfront, children of immigrants. Some could barely read, but they were hungry to learn. On opening day, Rosalie stood before her first class and a map of the Atlantic spread on the wall behind her. You're here because you want more than survival, she told them. You want purpose. You want to understand the world beyond these docks. I promise you, work hard, listen well, and you'll not only understand that world, you'll help shape it. A girl in the front row, maybe 13s, with calloused hands and determined eyes, raised her hand. Miss Rosalie, my Da says girls can't be sailors. Your Da is wrong, Rosalie said gently. Girls can be navigators, engineers, captains even. It won't be easy, people will doubt you, just like they doubted me. But if you're willing to work twice as hard to prove yourself, you can do anything a boy can do. Maybe even better. The girl smiled, and Rosalie saw herself in that young face. Over the next few years, James and Rosalie built a life that balanced business, education, and family. Their first child, Margaret Maggie Sullivan, was born in 1889, named for James's mother, not his aunt. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and from the moment she could walk, she was climbing on ship models in the study. Their son Henry followed in 1891, named for Captain Morrison, in honor of the man whose truth had saved them. He was quieter than his sister, but equally curious about the family business. Jean-Baptiste Devereux moved to New York at Rosalie's insistence. His health improved away from the harsh Louisiana coast, and he became a beloved figure at the academy, teaching knot-tying and regaling students with stories of life on the bayous. Rosalie's brothers joined Sullivan & Co. as officers too, proving themselves through hard work rather than nepotism. One became a ship's captain, the other managed the company's New Orleans office, establishing a direct trade route between Louisiana and New York. The Devereux family, once facing poverty and disgrace, had been lifted up by Rosalie's courage and James's integrity, but James never let them forget. Rosalie saved all of us. Never forget that. 20 years later, the Devereux Sullivan Maritime Academy had grown into a campus of 3 buildings, training hundreds of students annually. Graduates served on ships across the world. 12 had become captains, including Marie, that eager girl from the early days, now commanding a merchant vessel in the China trade. Rosalie, now 49, her hair mostly silver but her eyes still sharp, stood at the dedication of the newest building, a dormitory that would house 50 additional students. James D's grayer and walking with a slight limp from an old injury stood beside her. Their children were grown. Maggie worked as the academy's chief navigation instructor, recently married to a marine architect. Henry had just graduated from engineering school and was designing revolutionary new ship propulsion systems. My mother once told me, Rosalie said to the assembled crowd of students, graduates, and donors, that the sea doesn't care about your name or your money. It only cares about your skill and your courage. This academy was built on that principle, that talent and determination matter more than birthright. She gestured to the building behind her. This new dormitory will house students from across the country, children from fishing villages and factory towns, from immigrant families and poor backgrounds, anyone with the will to learn and the courage to dream. Because, James added, stepping forward, Rosalie taught me that the greatest fortune isn't measured in gold or ships. It's measured in the lives you change, the opportunities you create, and the future you build for others. The crowd applauded. Among them sat Patrick O'Brien, now retired from the sea but teaching maritime safety at the academy, Rosalie's brothers and their families, Jean-Baptiste, now elderly but still sharp-eyed, graduates who'd gone on to success, and dozens of current students who saw in Rosalie and James proof that circumstances of birth needn't dictate destiny. As the ceremony concluded and people mingled, a young girl, perhaps 14, with dark skin and determined eyes, approached Rosalie shyly. "Mom, I'm starting here next term. I'm from South Carolina. My mother was a washerwoman who taught herself to read, and she taught me. I want to learn navigation, to see the world she never could." Rosalie smiled, seeing herself in this girl's hungry ambition. "What's your name?" "Sarah, Mom." "Sarah Freeman." "Well, Miss Freeman," Rosalie said, extending her hand, "welcome to the academy. Your mother would be proud, and I promise you, if you're willing to work hard and push through when others doubt you, you'll not only see the world, you'll chart your own course through it." The girl's face lit up with joy and determination. As the sun set over the East River, painting the water gold and orange, Rosalie and James walked back toward their carriage. The academy building stood solid and proud behind them, lights already glowing in the windows where students studied late. "We did it," James said softly. "Built something that will outlast us." "We did," Rosalie agreed. "Stay together." They climbed into the carriage, heading home to the brownstone they'd bought years ago, modest by Fifth Avenue standards, but filled with love and laughter and grandchildren who were already showing signs of inheriting the family's seafaring spirit. The carriage rolled through New York streets, past the mansions of the wealthy and the tenements of the poor, past the docks where ships from around the world unloaded their cargo, past the lights of a city that never slept. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded, calling to anyone brave enough to answer, promising adventure and opportunity, and the chance to become more than you were born to be. James pulled Rosalie close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, watching the city lights blur past. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Leaving Louisiana? The simple life you could have had?" "Not for a single moment," she said. "I left behind poverty and limitation. I found purpose and partnership, and a love worth fighting for. That's not something to regret." "I love you, Rosalie Devereux Sullivan," he said, kissing her temple. "And I love you, James Sullivan," she replied, "from the docks to empires and every storm between." The carriage turned onto their street, where warm light glowed in the windows of their home. Inside, their children waited with dinner, with stories of the day, with the comfortable chaos of a family built on honesty and love. And somewhere in Louisiana, in a small dock house that James had purchased and renovated, a plaque hung by the door. "Here lived Rosalie Devereux, who dared to dream beyond the horizon. May all who pass remember, courage changes everything." Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, sharing it with friends, and writing a comment below. Your support means everything to us and keeps us inspired to tell more stories filled with love, resilience, redemption, and second chances. At the end of this video, you'll find another unforgettable romance from our collection. Click and discover where the next story will take you. With all our appreciation, the Empire of Heart Stories team